All right. I will call to order the Lapse Extension Subcommittee. Our role is to make sure that the back part of House Bill 25 is exactly correct and to identify money that can be repurposed that is left over from lapsed line items. There's a couple ways I can do this. We can blaze through it, or I can go a little more slowly and explain how I do what I do, because there are some people who think that I'm a wizard for knowing how to do this, but my goal would be to have you all understand how I do it. So what's the committee's pleasure?
Well, if we can, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. I think it would be, because some of us are new, some of us aren't as new, but your wisdom is if we can just get a tenth of your wisdom on what you're doing, I think we would all benefit from this as we move forward in the future.
All right, that's what I was hoping for. So let's take a look at House Bill 25 from this year. And if you look in your brown sleeve, in the LBA orientation that we had on the very first day, there is a copy of the 2023 House Bill 25. And that starts on its page 18. And that's interesting when we come to how did I create this sheet that I've been working from. So House Bill 25 appropriates anything that is going to be funded by bonding. The operating budget is things that are appropriated out of plain old money. Now, the debt service for the bonds is paid out of the general fund or the highway fund or some other fund, but the appropriations are in House Bill 25. So if we look at the beginning, after the enacting clause, Section 1 is all of the appropriations that typically are general funded, but it also includes the federal funded, which are not bonded because we just ask the federal government to send us money that we're entitled to. And then there are, like, Fish and Game has their own fund, and the Liquor Commission has their own fund. So if you were to look at, for example, the Fish and Game Department that starts on page 2, you've got an appropriation for hatchery predator control and then less other funds. So, and then the net state is 0. And then there's a footnote that starts on line 14 that directs the treasurer to issue the bonds and the debt service from the Fish and Game Fund. And the same would be true of the Liquor Fund. Yes.
Yes, could you give us a minute to find our?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Is that this document you're working on?
Well, you can look at the previous House Bill 25.
Mr. Chair, may
Or
I,
this
if I
year.
can make a recommendation?
Yeah.
Mr. Shea, this capital budget worksheet that you put together is in essence exactly what he's talking about. That's,
Well, right at the moment, I'm talking
Okay.
about the beginning of House Bill 25.
okay,
That worksheet starts at the lapse extension part.
okay, which is
But
what this committee is
I'm
charged
sort of
with.
explaining
Okay,
how,
okay.
how the first part is put together.
So what document are you?
Well,
looking at?
This is House Bill 25 from this year. In that LBA orientation document, starting on page 18, is House Bill 25 from the previous time.
So somewhere we have this year's HB 25, right?
Right.
If I might, I think what the Chairman Jack's trying to provide to this subcommittee is that how House Bill 25 is structured. So it doesn't matter which one you're looking at this moment. He just wants to explain to you what the Section 1 does and then what the lapse extensions do. And then the document that Representative Mills held up is all the lapse extensions that were in the governor's proposed capital budget and were essentially included in the House Bill 25 as introduced for 2025.
Right. So section 1 is going to be the general funded and other funded and federal funded appropriations. And at the beginning, it says the sums are hereby appropriated. Now, in part 2, starting on page 4, are the highway funded items. Now, the Constitution says that the highway fund can only be expended for the construction, maintenance, or supervision of highways. And also, because the Department of Safety collects the highway fund, they're allowed to charge the expenses of collecting it to the highway fund. And they call that cost of collections. So if they say they're going to fund something out of cost of collections, it's deceptive because they're looking at the money before it goes into the highway fund as opposed to the money being appropriated after it's already gotten into the highway fund. So once in a while they say, this is not affecting the highway fund because it's appropriated out of cost of collections, but that's just simply, are you inside the door or outside the door? So we wouldn't fall for that. Okay, so section 2 is exactly the same as section 1, except that their highway fund, the debt service on the bonds will come from the highway fund. Now then you get into, so in section 3, which starts on line 7, says how we're going to fund those appropriations. And it says the treasurer is authorized to, well, section 3 says that the agencies are allowed to expend the funds, provided what we want them to do, for example, if it says police standards and training, main entrance security improvements, we don't want them to spend that on air conditioning. They're supposed to spend the appropriation on the purpose that's in the bill. Now, sometimes an agency will come and say, we have money left over, we want to use it for this. And that happens several times in the agency presentations. And we'll come to how we do that. So now in section 4, the community colleges and the university system have their own board of trustees. So even though we give them money, it's not quite the same as giving the Department of Corrections money because they have their own board of trustees that controls the expenditure of that money. So in essence, we block grant them the money, hoping that they will spend it on what it's been appropriated for. But we don't have as much control over them because they have their own board of trustees. And Mr. Shea, if you want to jump in anywhere and
the community college system and the university system need the approval of their board of trustees to expend the appropriation that the legislature has provided through the capital budget. So that's the purpose of sections 4 and 5.
right, so section 4 and 5 basically explain that for the community colleges and university system, the board of trustees is actually who's expending the funds as opposed to one of the more normal state agencies. Yeah.
So, thank you. So when they spoke to us the other day about specific funding for specific buildings, like they did at Plymouth and they did at Keene, like the Elliott, they're deferring and they're doing some other work in other locations. So that's their complete choice. We just grant them certain dollar amounts for funds to do the work that they feel is responsible. So in reality, we're not really responsible for any kind of control on that. But it could just be that we let them know what our concerns are about not funding things that we specifically funded for. Is that the case? So they can still, even though I'm asking them a ton of questions the other day about specific buildings and why they're doing it, in reality, they have the choice to do that regardless. Is that true?
Well, for
No.
example, on line 18, for the community colleges, it says for the completion of the project enumerated. So they're supposed to spend the money on the project enumerated, which is whatever building it is.
So you were going to mention something. Thank you.
No, I was just going to, Representative Jack said it. Basically, they've identified the projects that they would like the legislature to provide funding for. Those are the projects they're to use the money for. They need to get their board of trustees to approve the expenditure of that money after the appropriation has been provided through a capital budget.
So,
So they would be doing the three campuses, each of the buildings they identified for each of those campuses. That would be what the money would be spent on. What they've asked for this, from this committee the day they presented, was to have some flexibility. They would still do those projects, but to move the money as they did with Hyde Hall. They put more towards that than they did the other projects because they determined that was a better return on value for that campus at that point. But they still want to do the other projects.
Mr. Chairman, so I just want to make sure I understand this right with the lapse
Yeah,
situation.
that's why
So,
we're doing it.
so in reality, they asked for the money for specific projects, so it's appropriate for us to review those projects in detail. But when they come back, for instance, for lapse funding, they may have spent money on a different scope on the, no?
Yeah, yeah, they're not supposed to do that.
They would have spent it on those buildings they identified. It just may be the timing of when they do the project for that building. So they have, in the case that you just saw presented to you, they had two buildings that were part of a 3 biennia appropriation. They front-loaded one of those buildings more than they had originally proposed and put less towards the second building, but they're still going to do both projects.
Okay, all right, so that's clear. So then I want to just make sure, so with the lapse funding, the funding that they've got in their lapse extensions should be directly in line with what they've done for those specific projects and that we'd approved, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Right.
Except
Okay.
University System didn't have any lapse extensions. Community College did.
Right. When we get to,
Okay,
when we get down there, well, actually, we're almost there. That's section 13 on page 6. I'll explain why we have lapse extensions. So
thank you.
on page 5 in section 7, this is how we're going to fund the appropriations, and it authorizes the treasurer to borrow an amount of money that's equal to whatever the general fund total is, the highway fund total, and the other funds total. So that's what authorizes the treasurer to borrow the money that's identified in sections 1 and 2. And then the rest of this down to, so the rest of it is pretty much boilerplate. An important thing is the section 12, where the Division of Public Works supervises the projects, and there's something called the Federal Davis-Bacon Act that says prevailing wage has to be paid for any federally funded project. And that's, so that, now, why is it that we have lapse extensions? You've heard it said, one legislature can't bind the next. And so we only appropriate money for 2 years. Is that at the end? So the appropriations in section 1 only last for 2 years. Where's that?
That's
Where's,
statutory. Yeah, that's found in the RSA.
that's in another statute.
Yeah.
So in another statute, it says that these appropriations last until the end of that biennium. And that's because one legislature can't bind the next. Now, as we know, construction projects can potentially last for years and years and years. So in order to prevent losing that appropriation, that's why we have the lapse extension section. And the first thing it says is the following appropriations are hereby extended to June 30th. And if you look at the very end, the effective date of that section is June 30th. That's not in this year's.
So the effective date would be July 1.
Well, the previous one says that the lapse extension section takes effect on June 30th.
Um,
Doesn't it have to do that? To
For
catch-
the, when you repurpose, so when you're repurposing, you do a hard lapse on things you don't want to continue forward for June 30. But I'll confirm that after were done here today.
Oh, that's House Bill 2. I'm looking. Yeah, the previous, the 2023 version has section 24, which is the lapse extensions, shall take effect June 30th, and then the remainder shall take effect July 1st. And I think we need that in this year's because it catches the lapse before it lapses.
Correct.
So that's a mistake.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me just go through the notes that so the items in that lapse extension section are all the appropriations that were made in prior years that we want to have extended. Now, there's a few things that can happen. One is we extend the appropriation, the agency says, yeah, we're not done with the project, we need the money. So that we check that off. We can find out that there's an appropriation that was made in a prior year that isn't in the new House Bill 25. That can mean one of several things. It can mean the project is done and the agency agrees that it's done, it's paid all of its bills, and it no longer needs that appropriation. That's sort of the normal way that an appropriation would expire. So then our question is there money left in that line that we can use for something else? And it doesn't count against the bonding authority that the treasurer recommended because it's already been counted in the previous year. So it's already authorized but unissued debt.
It's already been bonded.
Well, it's already been counted in the amount in the debt. If you look at the debt to revenue ratio that they're so interested in, it's already counted in debt. So we can use it again without it counting against what the treasurer recommends.
Yes.
What the treasurer recommends is all for the new appropriations in section 1 and 2.
So I have another question on this. So you mentioned two things there. You mentioned one, that if we find that there's something that hasn't lapsed yet, that there's money left in a project, that we can reallocate that to a different project?
We can reallocate it to anything that we choose to
anything.
reallocate it to.
Okay, that's something I got to get used to.
If you look in, and that's one of the reasons that I referred to the previous bill, if you look in that middle section where that's in between section 1 and 2, you will find several examples of reallocations and repurposes.
So I just want to be clear on this. We can reallocate it because it's already been appropriated within our funding
Well-
authority for any project that is requested.
We
Or-
could allocate to a project that wasn't requested.
Right. Okay, so then the other,
After the governor delivers the pink book to us.
Yeah.
That pink book, the House owns the budget
right,
until it passes the budget and sends it to the Senate.
okay.
And we can do whatever we like to this bill. We can amend it in any way we want.
Okay. No,
The
So-
Constitution sets our salary, so.
so then the other question that's related to that is, I just want to make sure I understand the process again, that if, it's kind of the sequence of events. We typically wouldn't do anything with funding, especially on lap stuff, unless the particular department requested that money. Is that not true?
Well, they know, they're supposed to know
Yeah,
the status of their project, whether they've let a contract, whether they have funds that they're paying out on a contract, and how much is left in that appropriation. They're supposed to keep track of that. So they will know when they think the project is done. They will know when it's ongoing. And if it's done, Mr. Shea has access to the unexpended balance, and the agency also has.
That's correct. And so I don't know if you have the 23 House Bill 25 in front of you
I-
by chance?
I don't think so.
No.
Well, it's in this.
But that's
it's
all
in-
right.
It's in
Oh,
this
I think I
document
got- I
that
think I
was
got
in your
that
brown
somewhere.
sleeve to begin with.
So Representative Brown, just to kind of sum up what's happening is today, what you're doing in this subcommittee is you're looking at the lapse extensions in the back of the capital budget. The agencies have been presenting to this committee in full what the status is of their projects and if they need a lapse extension or not. In some instances, they might have provided a value of what they didn't expend. I will check that against the statement of appropriations to see if that number matches up. And if it does, that amount becomes available to reuse for another project that maybe has been requested as in front of the full committee. So in prior capital budgets, we call it repurposing. And this committee will make a decision on, we want to fund a project A in the Department of Transportation. In the repurposing section, we would take the money left over from projects that were done and use it for a new appropriation for that department. Usually it's for a project that they presented to the full committee and that you've discussed and come to some agreement on. And all the agreement is done on the full committee basis. It's not done by this subcommittee.
So Representative Brown, if you're looking for a timeline on this, all the presentations that we just heard today, this past week, those are for this current budget and this current bonding. When we get to the end of everything, when we look at the lapse extensions, these are for previous ones from years past that they still haven't spent all that money yet. It's taken that long. And so we have to keep track of all the money that's still out there. When they finally do finish it, as Representative Jackson, when the project is finally finished and we've given them $100 for their project and 6 years later, they come to us and go, the project is done. We only spent 95. We got $5 over. One of two things will happen. They'll either say, well, we've got this other project you gave us 100 for, we're going to overspend by about $5. We'd like to repurpose this money for that project. Or the other thing is that we're good, we've got nothing else to do it on. We're lapsing that money, it's back to the committee. That's when the committee takes that money and turns around and looks at where we're currently at on HB 25, the current, everybody's Christmas wish list. And we add up all those little $5 and $12 and $16 here. And I think we're getting close back to $649,000 that we will be able to, we can either repurpose it all, and I don't think it's ever been done, but we can turn it back into the general fund if we wanted to. Can we not?
It would just be a lapse, so it basically would
Yeah.
just clean the books off,
Yeah,
so
right.
it
That's
doesn't
what-
help the
That way
general
you just
fund.
answered one of the questions I have, whether we return that back or whether we use
That's
that
it.
funding. You know, when we look at the governor's budget, whether we say we agree with all of this or not,
Mhm.
we may or may not agree with it as a committee, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm good with that now. I
Well-
just wanted to make sure I understood the sequence and the authority we had as far as spending that money, repurposing that money, because I'm not used to that from my business background.
Right.
So thank you.
One thing that always happens is agencies will come in and say, the governor didn't fund this, but we think it's really important. And so that's sort of the menu of items that we pick and choose when we have extra money as to what to fund and not fund. So the one last thing I want to cover is, so if we look at where it says the appropriation made to the Department of Administrative Services in, and then there's this gobbledygook. And I want to cover how to read that. So it says the appropriation made to the Department of Administrative Services in 2023, 113:1, Roman 1A1 for courthouse generators. Now, if I go back to my 2023 House Bill 25, it turns out, so every time a bill passes, if it gets through how a bill becomes a law to the end, it gets assigned a chapter number. So if I went over to the state library and pulled down the laws of 1967, there would be chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Those are all the bills that passed in 1967. And so the House Bill 25 in 2023 is chapter 113. So if I went to the laws of 2023, it would be chapter 113 would be the text of this bill. So the 2023, so 113 is the chapter number. of laws of 2023, colon 1 is section 1. So that's our section 1, that is the general fund capital appropriations. And then A, and then 1 is the Roman 1 is the Department of Administrative Services. A is court facilities, and number 1 is courthouse generators. So that whole expression refers to that appropriation. And if you had the 2023 House Bill 25 in front of you, you could follow along and find that. And then the next one is number 2, the Rochester Courthouse. And then later on, so now if you go down below to number 9, you'll see that that was made in 2021, Chapter 107, extended by. So now if you went to the lapse extensions of 2023, you would see Section 24 is the lapse extensions number 2, and then it gives the purpose again. So that's how to read all these gobbledygook references.
That's good. That's good, but I guess my question is, what do we actually check on this? Do we actually go through each of these line
Well,
items?
we're going to do that in a minute. So
Thank you.
now, if I go back to, I'm going to go slightly out of my, one of our purposes is to identify money that we can use for something else. So I'm going to go slightly out of my lane and mention that during the agency presentations in section 1, we determined that the Jeffrey Ringe CTE renovation did not, so we do not put an appropriation for a CTE in on, there's a local match required for a CTE. And we learned on Tuesday that Jeffrey and Ringe did not pass the bonding authority that they would need to supply their local match for this appropriation. So, and also Milford did not. That's in a mail that Mr. Shea sent out yesterday. And so the normal practice of the committee would be to remove that. There is no CTE waiting in the wings, shovel ready to take its place. So that is $18.5 million that we will delete from the governor's recommended budget because of the failure of the town to appropriate their share. And that's money that we can reuse. Well, that's the only one I mentioned so far.
Milford.
Oh, well, there's a Milford.
Milford.
Milford was the backup, is the next school. There's a rotation of CTEs, and Milford is the next one in line, and they're not ready either. So there is no school that is ready that could take the place of this one.
So-
Just to be clear, Milford is not listed in here.
Milford's not in here. It used to be that we tried to do 2 per budget, and they're getting so expensive that kind of fills up the budget.
Representative Jack,
So-
if I could just
Yeah.
interject, I think that we want to refocus this subcommittee on just the lapse extensions
well, I
because
have
you
2 more
haven't had your
comments.
public hearing
I have
yet.
2 more comments on section 1, and then then we'll do that. Okay,
So, excuse me, just for
Yep.
education purposes for me. So that money was originally set aside for education for the CTEs. And again, is that $18 million? Is it similar to what we'd spoken about before, that we can repurpose that money for
Well,
anything, or do
it-
we do it within?
it's
the
not appropriated
education?
yet,
Okay,
so we could use it to reduce the amount that we're going to appropriate.
right.
Which we've discussed the fact that the governor had 143 million and the treasurer recommended somewhat less. So one thing that we might choose to do is reduce the total amount that we're bonding, general fund bonding. And now we have $18 million right off
Sounds
the
good to me.
table. At the top of page 2, there was a typo on line 2. The word replacement should be deleted. And at the end, 51 should be 50. And you had that, I would assume. The Winnipesaukee River Basin Control Fund.
Right, but those are things that we would discuss at
Right,
the full
okay.
committee, not at this
And
lapse
then-
extension.
And then the judicial branch deleted theirs. So now we'll go to the lapse extensions. Now, let me explain. So Mr. Shea's worksheet only considers the lapse extension section in the current House Bill 25. The worksheet that I sent to you before we started, and I think Mr. Shea distributed. a
You
fresh
should
copy.
have a copy of both
Yeah.
worksheets. So mine looks like this. And as Representative Jack has indicated, this is the capital projects that were in the back of the governor's proposed capital budget that want to be extended and were subsequently included in House Bill 25 as introduced. Representative Jack's document, which he's holding up, is just a listing. He took the lapse extensions in the capital budget for 2023, and he compared that to what was in 2025.
Right, so the way I produce this is I go to the 2023 as enacted, and I make a line for every appropriation or extension in the 2023 version, and it's a lot easier if you have the one from the budget previous to that, because the extensions tend to be the same from year to year. So you'll notice in my document that I've got the 2023 appropriations, and then 2021, those were extensions that were in that budget. And this means, and then you apply the numbers from this year's House Bill 25, that's what's in the column to the right. So the first one is is the one I just read out from, for courthouse generators. That was the very first appropriation in 2023. And it's been extended by number one in this year's lapse extensions, and so on. Now, when Administrative Services was here, the reason why that's helpful is if you find one that's not extended, like, for example, the Hillsborough County South Cooling and Controls is not mentioned in this year, and that's a case where either the project is done or it's been accidentally omitted. And if it's accidentally omitted, we want to add it back so that they don't lose their appropriation. Now, we have one case this year where the agency has asked for a lapsed value to be added back, and that's the former chairman's under the Department of Transportation. It would fall between 183 and 184. And the caption is Carroll and Stratford Freight Rail Improvements, and it would be 2023 Roman 15, number 3.
Page are you on?
I'm on, well, I don't have page numbers on mine. It's Department of Transportation General Funds.
It's the last page.
It would be between 183 and 184. So the agency has requested that we add that extension so that those funds don't lapse and they can continue to spend them. Because without adding it back at the end of the fiscal year in June, that appropriation would lapse if we don't do anything. And they wouldn't be able to further expend the appropriation for Carroll and Stratford Freight Rail Improvements that was made in 2023. Yeah,
So I thought you said that this had lapsed, but it hasn't lapsed yet.
it will lapse on June 30th
So they didn't mention
unless
it.
it's mentioned in the lapse extension section of this year's House Bill 25.
Once a line item has lapsed, it's done, right?
Well,
Okay, that's what
unless-
you mentioned, some, you kind of
there
alluded
is
to
a
that.
loophole,
Okay,
and that is if the agency has encumbered the funds, and you probably know from the town what that is, you've signed a contract that obligates you to pay the funds, then they won't lapse even if they're not mentioned. But it does preclude you from, for example, signing
Reallocate.
another contract. Did you want to add anything to that? Yeah, yeah. So some agencies do it that way. They don't lapse extend their appropriations, and they rely on the encumbered balance method of having it not lapse.
we typically wouldn't allow it. We would
Well-
typically make sure that was included in the
Well-
lapsed funds.
We can't, I mean, we would sort of defer to how the agency wanted to do it. I personally recommend that it be included, because you never know when something might come up and you might need to sign a contract with a plumber. you know, to do to do a little bit of additional work or something like that in order to get the project done. But that's just my personal view. So I think, so
Do you want to go through my document to start with, and I can just explain to the members how I've structured it?
sure, if you want to do that.
So if you look at this document, the long sheet, I think it's 18 pages long, so it's all the lapse extensions, like I said, that were proposed in the governor's capital budget. If it says okay in the column to the right, that means the agency confirmed that that lapse extension is correct and still needed.
Yeah, there's 214 items.
If there's
in
a
there.
question or something that needs to happen with that lapse extension, it'll be grayed out. So if you go to page 4, lapse extension 49,
I have that.
they don't need that anymore, so that they can, that will be removed from this list. And if there's any balances remaining, that would be repurposed.
I have that there was 81,000. And that's not probably,
$81,500 that was going to be repurposed.
okay. So that line has 81,500 that we can use again. So that's one of our findings, is that line 49 can be deleted and has $81,500 that we can use again. And that's it for the Department of Administrative Services that I have.
Another question on that. Is there a reason why we just put okay on here and when we grade these out, we don't put the dollar amount we're considering lapse so that we could use this?
I
as
have a
worksheet?
separate sheet with all that.
Okay, because
that
I
I
personally
hadn't
would love
handed
to
out
see
yet.
that
Yeah.
here with that so that I know as we're looking at it, we can have an
Right.
idea what we're doing.
I have it all right here for you,
Okay, thanks.
and I'll give that to you now. I didn't want to leave it on the table because I wanted to have an explanation for it.
Right.
Because looking at it, you might not have understood what it was, but.
Thanks.
Okay, so we've done our first important piece of work. We've found money that can be lapsed, that can be repurposed. We found an item that should be deleted and it has money in it. So that's what we're here for. So the next agency is Agriculture, Markets, and Food. They responded by mail. They have one appropriation that's from 2021, and they want to keep it.
So for the agencies that responded through an email, you'll have a 3-page stapled together document. It'll be handwritten, the agency's name and a highlight on it. And that's just their comments to you saying that, yeah, we need this lapse extension and possibly why.
So our next agency is Community College. Right. I'm on my second page under Agriculture, Markets, and Food. And
Representative
then,
Jack, which document are you walking through?
well, I use my document because it allows me to locate the items that are lapsing.
I would suggest to the members that you use my document.
Well,
Yeah, because it does show you where there's things that are shaded out and
Yeah.
maybe the difference. Representative Jack has notes on his document. That's why he's holding on to his.
right.
But I think it would be harder to go back and forth between his document and this document.
So just an additional point. It's kind of interesting. We get about 6 different documents we're shifting back and forth from. I'm looking at your budget extension worksheet, then you give us this sheet here. I don't know why it couldn't be consolidated onto one sheet, which gave the dollar amounts and the lapse extension information too. I don't know why we go back and forth through multiple documents.
It was a timing thing with the documents. I finalized the one in your right hand yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
I had already done this one. I was still asking agencies questions. Sometimes this meeting occurs before we have all the final information. So we just identify, yeah, there's something coming. I'm still working with the agency.
Okay, I'll just transfer these numbers to this sheet then. Thank you.
Great.
I think, I mean, in the end, you don't really need to because it's the document in your right hand is the one that you're going to really be more concerned about.
All right, thank you.
I have two lapses for the community college. Do we know? One of them is for 2021:14, critical maintenance. One is for the NCC engineering technology. Do we know if there's any money in those?
There was nothing left.
Okay,
So unless it shows up on this sheet, even if the agency said they were done with it and it was completed, there was no money left unless it showed up on this sheet.
That makes it easier.
okay. Our next agency is corrections, and we have the agency got back to us with some items that were in House Bill 20, in the governor's version that can lapse. The first one is number 64.
Yep.
And that has 535,000.
335.
Oh, 335. Okay, so item 64, we want to delete because that project is complete and it has $335,000 of usable money, which is a nice find. Number 65, they want to lapse, and that has 0. And then 66, they want to lapse, that has 31141.
Yep.
And then 67, they want to lapse.
64, 65, and 66 were all that they wanted to lapse.
Oh, so 67, they do not want to lapse. Okay. And there's quite a number that are not in House Bill 25. I have, let's see. So there's perimeter security and fence detection from 2019. They would assume doesn't have any money in it. And then that's from 2019.
So 85,465.
Yeah, the one you're looking at is 2021.
That's 19.
Yeah, there's one from 19.
So if you look on this single page,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
good.
So what happens with some agencies is they know the project's not going to need the lapse extension, but there is some balance left. That's what is reflected on the one pager. In some instances, the lapse extension was included in the proposed bill. That's what we're cleaning up. They don't need it, so we're going to take it out. In one instance, we have a case where the agency said, oops, we really want that lapse extension. Let's add it back in, which was the Department of Transportation's rail-related project.
Okay, so there's an item that you wouldn't find in House Bill 25 because it lapsed, and there's 85,465 remaining. On my document, it's between 71 and 72.
Right.
So we'll be able to use that. And there's replace electrical services, which has 267. We wouldn't bother with, I would assume. 'Cause
I've added that one in to try to
Yeah.
get to the
Ah.
final number is 649.
And then from 17, the Transitional Work Center has 8308.
Yep, from 17, yep.
And just for completeness, we'll put 267. Okay.
It looks like there's 3 others on this one list that we have money that we're drawing from.
Yeah, so you have the trades building for 335,000. It's a 2021 project. You have the roof replacement for the NNHCF, which is for 21,387, which is a 2021 capital appropriation. You have the door controller upgrade for the Department of Corrections for 31,141, which is also a 2021 appropriation. And the last 2021 appropriation was the replacement of the steam line and traps for 6,183. The next correction projects come from the 2019 capital budget. That was the perimeter security for 85,465. The replace electrical services for 267. And then the last two projects from corrections are from the 2017 capital budget for the body alarms of 43,534, and then the transitional work center bathroom replacements for $8,308. So that accounts for all the lapses that would come from the Department of Corrections.
So does everyone understand how this is working? Good. Yes? Okay. And that was a pretty fertile agency
Yeah.
for getting money back.
If I can just interject for the new members, in the past, this committee met like this and it was separate. It was just like when we went through all the agencies coming in and and they would then present our lapse extensions. That's how Representative Jack developed his own little system here on doing this, because you had to have all the sheets to refer to it and everything else. And we wouldn't know any of these numbers until the end of today. And we'd sit there and go through all, and it would be an all-day thing. Mr. Shea came up with the genius idea when we started to schedule all this that said, let's bring them in and get the lapse extensions at the same time they make their regular presentation. So he has done all this background work that this committee used to have to do and shortened it up into these documents. So you've got the full explanation from Representative Jack on how this whole thing works. And we'll thank Mr. Shea for the shortcuts on all this stuff, because otherwise we would be here till good 4:30, 5 o'clock. So now it's easier to just skim through all this and double check. And we're done, so.
Our next agency is education. And we have money in, right before 73, pre-engineering technology has 19,911 that is lapsing. And they have one that's continuing. Our next agency is energy, and they have two that are continuing. They sent us that by mail. Environmental Services has some money. It has $3,274. And that's one that we should be deleting. That's line number 96 with 3274. And everything else in environmental services was correct as it was. If you disagree, please speak up. And then Fish and Game has 3 items, and those were all correct. And then Health and Human Services, we had to send them back with homework to go through these, in which they did respond.
Question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why is, on your sheet, Chris, why is 110 shaded, but it says okay?
It should have said completed. That's my error.
Okay, so it should be,
It's completed, it's going to be deleted.
okay, perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
And also with Health and Human Services, if you turn to 114 and 116, those are shaded and marked as completed. Health and Human Services got back to me later yesterday after I produced these documents and said that they made an error and that they would like lapse extensions to continue for those two projects.
Okay, so
Which one of those again?
114 and 116.
Thank you.
So those are going to be kept, not deleted.
and 115 should lapse.
That's correct.
Okay.
So 110, 111, 112, and 115 should be deleted from the lapse extension list.
And it looks like the only one that has money,
It doesn't say. That was gonna be my
Yes.
question. 112 and 115, waiting on a final invoice. Do we have any idea if that's gonna be flat or there'll be?
They don't plan on having anything left over in those accounts.
Okay.
The only account that they had $1,800 was the 2021 BEAS systems modernization.
that's number 110 in the bill, but we're going to delete that. So in HHS, we're deleting 110, 111, 112. We're keeping 114 at their request.
No, yeah, you, no, we're keeping. Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
Is that right?
Yep, you're
We're
right.
keeping 114, we're deleting 115, and we're keeping 116 at their request. And then the only one that has money of any of those is the 110 with 1858. So are we all correct on that?
Yep.
Everyone agrees on that?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. DOIT. And what I have is that they wanted to lapse 124.
That's correct. And there's no
and-
balance
and
to
with-
that.
With zero, and everything else was correct there.
On the one pager sheet, there was a project that they were lapsing from 2019 related to cybersecurity. That was for $5,256.
Oh, so that has. Is that on here? Oh, okay, so it's 19. So that's 2019 IXC, so that has 5256. On my sheet, that's between 122 and 123.
So Representative Brown, that's another reason why it doesn't all show up on here is that they're not all in there.
All right. So the courts had three projects. There were 125, 126, and 127, and House Bill 25. And they got back to us by mail, and they say they would like to lapse 126 with no money. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the money in 120, they provided text for us that where they would repurpose 125 and 127 within their own department. This is not unusual when an agency has money left over that they want to keep it, and they will propose a project within their own department to repurpose it to.
So I had forwarded to the committee the email from the courts related to these three projects. The two projects that they want to extend are E-Court, and they would like to change the title of the project from E-Court to E-Court and Associated Critical Infrastructure. So the E-Court was a very narrowly focused project. As they've gotten into it, they've understood that there's other electronics or communications that need to be updated so that they can continue to process these files that they use through the E-Court system. So they were hoping the committee would consider that when you meet next week or the week after when you start to make final decisions. It doesn't have to happen, But it is a request of the judicial branch, and they'd be willing to come meet with the committee next week or whenever the chair would like, if they would like that at all.
Right.
Do we have a dollar? Mr. Chair, may I?
Sure.
Do we have a dollar value assigned to 125 and 127
Uh,
that is, so we can make that decision?
Yeah, so it's $1.3 million, just over that.
Is that between the two?
The two, yeah.
So it's 1.3 million?
1.373. And I misspoke when I said they didn't have money in Project 126. It's actually on the one pager at the top of the line. They had $6,035 left.
Okay.
That
Okay,
was 635.
6035 on the item number 126.
So on my document, those two projects are grayed out, not because the lapse extension will go away, but there's been a request related to that specific lapse extension. So if this committee were to agree to the request, I would have to go into the lapse extension and change the title. So this lapse extension would go from E-Court to the new name, to whatever the new name becomes. If it is the, what they recommend or ask for, which is the associated critical infrastructure, then that would be amending this lapse extension title to reflect that.
If I'm not mistaken, we have to actually go back to the 2021 House Bill 25
Yeah.
and amend the appropriation
So,
and then extend it
yeah.
with the
So-
new title.
So what I've spoken to the chair about is putting together the requests that these agencies are making in this manner and providing that to the committee if the committee wants to see it next week or the week after, whenever you have your work sessions, so that you can see exactly what would be changing. But when an agency requests to change a title of a project that had been appropriated in a previous capital budget, we actually amend the previous capital budget to reflect that title. And then you have to amend the lapse extension to have the new title. And in the current capital budget, you'd have a section that does all that.
And you would also say, as amended by this act.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Or we can choose to take the 1.3 million and repurpose it to another project.
I would, I would suggest that you would talk to the judicial branch and have them come in to explain. There is still some E-Court specific functions that they're doing, but there's some other pieces to the outside of that. And I think in the email I sent, they gave
Yeah,
you
they
some
actually have
examples.
Some explanation of it.
Right. And they associated some costs with some of the things that they are currently doing related to E-Court and some of the expanded things that they would like to do. But it's not everything yet. It's one of those situations where as they move further in this project, they've been doing E-Court since 2012, I think, is when they got the first appropriation. So this has been a very long-standing project, trying to get all the courts connected, trying to get all the ability to move information back and forth fluidly between the courts, the people who use the courts. And as things become new and as new things are created and old things become obsolete, they have come up with some new challenges. So they were just seeing if there was a possibility to extend the title. So I say all that, it's a long-winded explanation to say there probably isn't $1.3 million. They still need some of that to do the E-Court, and if they're still doing the E-Court, we wouldn't lapse it. But you wouldn't change the title, so they would be very narrowly focused still.
Right, yeah. This also is, so that people can electronically file cases instead of having to file them on paper at a courthouse.
So if I might, I just want to make sure I understand. So this is typical that, since this is all related, the E-Court and the associated infrastructure to support the E-Court, this would be typical. So will they give us some type of summary on that so that we understand?
Yeah, there's
So
an
that we can
email.
make so we can make the connection?
Somewhere in this
I'm not
file
looking
that
for
we
any
just
more
got.
paperwork.
Is that in this pile of new paperwork?
No, this is from the email I sent to.
Okay, I didn't.
provided to me.
Oh.
Thanks. Thank you. You knew this was gonna come, didn't you?
Well, I suspected. But I made plenty of copies for everybody here as well as the committee.
Yeah, I think we talked about this ahead of time. Normally, this would be something also brought up in the committee because we, Public Works and Highways, we are the oversight to all of this. So we don't let them do whatever they want. If they've got a change and it's justifiable, we're the check and balance and we will approve that. So.
But again, it's not a decision for here. It's just to let you know why that was grayed out and that the request was made. This is something that the full committee
The
would
full committee will discuss.
discuss
Here,
after the public
here
hearing.
is for the fact finding to go so far as to say they want to repurpose on
Yes.
these lines, and then we report that back to the full committee.
Correct.
Our next agency is liquor, and everything was good, but it's liquor funds, so it doesn't help us with any general fund item.
Right, and I put out a long sheet. It looks like a spreadsheet. That was their response back to me. Yep. And to Representative Jack's point, because it is using liquor funds, whether they have money to lapse or not, it doesn't help the committee with repurposing unless there was a liquor project requested. There was not, so it just goes away.
All right, in military affairs. Oh, sorry.
So can you explain that it just goes away to me, what you mean?
Well-
Well, it
that
just-
Funding is just basically gone.
It's gone. So it just lapses back to the liquor fund. So
That's
if
what
there's,
I
it's all, it doesn't get you reused for anything. It doesn't stay on the books. It gets cleaned up and zeroed out so that it's not carried going forward in the state financials.
Thanks.
In military affairs, everything was good. They did send later items 138, 139, and 143. They want to repurpose slightly.
So that's another case of where the agency is requesting to change the title of the projects. They indicated to the committee when they were before the full committee that in trying to get some of the federal funds, they needed to change the project focus to make them more competitive with the process that's used to get those funds. The three projects, two of them are full 100% federal fund. One of them, it's a $4 million project, of which $1 million is general funds to match. It's a 75-25 match. And so that was their request. It relates to the Pembroke site to expand some of the uses. And again, I'll have an example of an amendment to provide to the committee if it's something that the committee as a full is interested in looking at.
So can you explain this to me? So it says request to repurpose would need to update lapse extension language? What is this
Right.
specific-
So what I explained earlier, if the committee were to agree to the title change, I would need to make sure that that lapse extension title changed along
It's
with
just
it.
the language on the.
Yeah.
title. Okay.
Well, we also have to go back to the original appropriation and change that title,
Right.
and then it can lapse forward.
Yep.
Yeah. If you look in the 2023, there's a couple of examples of doing that.
I think when we finish up with the lapse extensions themselves, I'll happily sit for a few minutes with anybody that wants to talk some more. No,
No,
just
I mean-
I think
This is,
not slow
this
at all.
takes a long time to get used to, so everyone here is a quick study. It's probably worth, there's a couple of land items here. It's probably worth mentioning. The reason we hold those, it's kind of a reserve fund to buy land. The reason why is any military construction has to be on state land, and sometimes the DOD will come and say, we have this project we want to do in some town, Chichester, and so we want you to buy this land. So they have to have the money. So that's why they keep in reserve these land items, so that if they get we don't have to wait the full 2 years to get money to buy the land. All right, moving on to DNCR. We had $382 in 2017.
Just a point I'd like to make. Typically, when we're trying to come up with these values for repurposing, I don't look for things less than $1,000, except when I'm trying to get to a number. In this case, we were at 649, just over 649. So I grabbed a couple of smaller projects to bump it as high as I could. But I didn't grab the $1 and $2 projects that were out there, so.
So everything on DNCR matched up. And we have the $382. So unless anyone has a question on that, the PDA actually came to us and they had 3 appropriations for the turning basin that they wanted to continue. Oops. And then police standards and training came to us. And they wanted to keep theirs. Interestingly, we have a repurpose in a 2024 bill, HB 1043, that applied to line 210.
You skipped over safety.
Well, I put it in alphabetical order, so police standards.
Oh,
So that was it. That's at 208, 209, and 210.
and they want to keep those 3 lapse
And they want to keep
extensions.
those. It's interesting to note that in 2024, House Bill 1043 repurposed the 210.
Yeah, they had come in with a bill before this committee.
Right.
Yep.
That doesn't happen very often, but if you're ever curious, that's the reference. And then Revenue Administration at line 171. They sent us mail that they want to keep that. This is the system that collects all the taxes, one of which we don't have anymore.
That's correct. It's the, what they call the RIMS system, or RIMS. So a couple of capital budgets ago, they proposed to the legislature that their old tax system was obsolete and out of date, and they needed a newer system to, for security purpose, one, because there was some issues with the sharing of the federal IRS information, that they were having some challenges with that because of security related to the old system and the ease of taxpayers filing. So they wanted to get more e-files available. Many taxpayers prefer to do that than filling out a piece of paper and sending it in. So that RIMS system has allowed them to do that. The unique thing about the RIMS system is that
I was just gonna
It's-
mention this.
it was bonded with some general funds directly, and then there's a special account that was created that is from the uptake, and the uptake is defined as revenue that we would not have otherwise collected because of the RIM system, or as a result of the RIM system, we are now collecting it. And one of the very simple results was that the notices to taxpayer that you haven't paid your bill. That used to not happen before this system. Now it happens and they collect revenue as a result of that. It's all in statute in terms of how much money can go into that system. It's meant to just pay the bond for into that account. It's meant to pay the bond for this system. And when that's done, all the money would go back to the general fund. So, but anyways, it was a creative way of an agency trying to find for a fairly expensive system, a way to pay for that.
Yeah.
Without taking most of your biennial appropriation that you see for the capital budget.
Right. That was an extremely expensive project, and that was really the only way that we could squeeze it in, is that it's kind of self-funding.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So now. Big Ben. Yeah. The next agency I have is Safety General. So I mentioned earlier that because, like, for example, because of the supervision of highways things, sometimes we apportion things between general fund and highway fund. And so that's what these are. I have that they wanted to lapse 178 and 179.
That's correct. And both of those, there's no money associated with those to add to the sheet. Both of those were funded with dedicated funds. The fire truck and HVAC was from, there's a fire emergency account that they used to pay for that. And then the criminal records has a dedicated fund that was used to pay for that system. So
Right.
any amounts left would just lapse back and not come from those accounts.
So we're gonna, in this agency, we're gonna delete 178 and 179. And then in the highway fund, everything was good. They've stayed here, but they didn't have any appropriation that was active. The last thing we did for them was build the archives building. So in transportation general, we are going to add an extension between, well, it would fall between 183 and 184. It's 2023, Roman 15, number 3, Carroll and Stratford Freight Rail Improvements, requested by the gentleman in the back.
Well, I think that the department agreed
Right.
to extend that lapse extension after discussions with the vendor that they were going to work with that project. The project had been encumbered and it had gone to get a contract. It's not due to be completed until upcoming December 25. So the thought was just to keep the lapse extension in there in case there was any other issues with this project and getting done.
And then in 206 and 207, when they were here, these are very old. They're another one of these cases where we might need the money because of a statutory reason. But they wanted to repurpose that. Those appropriations are from 2005 and 1999.
Right, and I forwarded an
And we've
email
got
to
the
the
language on that.
to a committee where they, to the committee where they want to repurpose those two accounts, which is there's about $825,000 available in the two accounts, and repurpose it for rail and ties for the state-owned active lines. So this is something where they have come in and asked for appropriations related to that in the past, and the department doesn't believe they'd be able to use the funds in the manner that they were originally designated for, and they are making this request. So this would be an example of you would zero this out and do a new appropriation. You would repurpose this because it would be for a slightly different purpose overall.
Right. So
If I may-
190 is an example of where we've made an appropriation for this in the past.
May I?
Sure.
So for those two items to repurpose, they currently have requests in for rails and ties. So can we move the money from these two that is left over to help fund the new request of rails and ties? Is that what?
So when the
was
committee
what
meets
you're
as a
saying?
full committee, you would discuss that option. You could decide how you would want to handle that. You could provide the agency with the request that they have here and not provide the other request that was made related to rails and ties for the state-owned. But you wouldn't,
Let me reframe my
You-
question then. Okay. So they want to use this money as a repurpose, and then under the new request, it would be added on to this repurpose money. So it'd be adding the two together? Is
no,
that what
no.
you're
It's going to
saying?
be two separate appropriations. There's a request for new appropriation that they're asking for the rails and ties that they presented to you on Tuesday this week. A second request is to repurpose these two projects to be used for rails and ties on the state-owned lines as well. It's not adding the two together. They would be separated
They're separate but the same.
for the same types of purposes. It may be to give them the ability to, whereas they identified there's like 4 miles of track that they really need to fix in the Conway scenic area.
Yeah.
I think this would be more of a, yes, like a statewide, and so as they identify places of their state-owned track that they really need to fix, they can come and do that without asking in 2 years, could we please have some more money to do it? But it is up to the committee as a full to decide how you want to, if you want to even do this, and how that would relate to the project that they've asked for going forward in the 25 budget.
That's actually the purpose of the subcommittee, to make these decisions and recommendations and get all the whys, the wherefores, and everything else like you're doing, so that when we come Tuesday, normally the chair doesn't sit in on this subcommittee. You present it to me and say, this is what they want to do, we looked into it, we did ask the questions, this is what we recommend. And then I'll put it to the entire committee to say, what do we want to do?
Well,
Yes,
what we
ma'am.
would normally do is say, we located an item that the agency wants to change. And then, yeah, I will still make the report even though
Correct.
you're here. Right.
It doesn't happen that often that they're repurposing it for the same thing that they're asking for in current. Because don't forget.
Right.
What we're looking at with HB 25 is the current requests. What this committee is looking at is just mopping up and taking care of all the past requests and the money that's already been allocated. So it's
And the new,
it's apples and
and,
oranges, but it's still fruit.
and the repurpose appropriation would be 2025 colon some other section number where this is lapsed and the new one is appropriated.
So if,
You can see an example of that in last year.
if I might, along the same lines as
Actually,
Representative
let's
Bogert
find
was
that.
talking about, do you know if the governor had plans for money? I don't recall from the testimony whether she had money in her budget for rails and ties?
No, she did not.
Okay, so this would basically offset what they're looking for, since it's already not included in the budget.
No, it will not offset it. Would, if I understood correctly, they want to take the money for the repurpose. That's going to be over
No,
here, that's
no,
B.
I understand that.
And
what
they
I'm
want
s-
to appropriate more
Yeah,
money
that's what I'm
for
saying.
the same thing.
Yeah,
So that's going to be A money, and then they got B money. And
yeah.
That-
that's what I was trying to get
That's what I understood.
clarified.
That's the request. They have a bucket and a B bucket, but it'll be up to the full committee to decide how they want to handle the two buckets. And it could become a single
And
bucket
there could be a C bucket.
or no bucket.
Yes,
Small bucket.
But again, that's not for today's,
right.
Right. So transportation highway, there wasn't any change to what was in there. And then veterans home, there wasn't any change. And that,
no, that,
so does everyone think they could do this next year?
so just in recap on your single sheet then, after looking at all the projects that the agencies believe that they will be completed by the June 30, 2025, there's approximately $649,513 that could be considered for projects that are being requested by the
That's on this page.
agencies.
That's on this page right here.
And that, again, would be a discussion for the full committee after the Chair Jack presents this committee, subcommittee's results. You know, that he would present that we went through this, that there's a lapse extension requested for the Stratford Carroll line that's not included, and that after reviewing all the lapse extensions that aren't needed, there's a value that can be considered by the full committee for projects that have been requested. It does not mean you have to use it, it just means that it's available to consider doing that.
If I'm,
So Representative Bogert, with your A and B buckets, okay? The request for the rail from DOT that has not been approved by the governor. And the DOT has also repurposed some money for that. This $649,000 is money available that, should we want to fund their A bucket, which is their request, we can do that with this money. There you go. That's just what I wanted to, as long as we're having A buckets and C buckets and B buckets, there.
And we also
Yeah.
have the two line items that we identified that where the agency has withdrawn the request, so that's money.
May I, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
I noticed on the bottom of your very, very useful page. I love it and thank you very much. This has been a tremendous help, this one pager. But there's three lines at the bottom of it.
Right.
Would you expand upon
Yep.
those three?
And thank you for bringing, I meant to do that earlier.
Oh, yeah, good idea.
So when the agencies presented the lapse extension information to you, when they presented their capital budgets, these three projects showed up with potential money available. These projects were never extended with a lapse extension. They were encumbered projects. So the money's truly not available for us to repurpose at this time because technically, when the project ended, anything left should have gone to zero. They didn't have this extension that I could go into the law and say, oh, move this extension and we'll take the money from it. So I just wanted to note that in case somebody remembered when the corrections came in, there were these two projects that on their list, why didn't I include it in the above number?
So if I may, where does the little over 20,000, I think it looks like it's a little over 20 grand.
Yeah.
Where does that go?
Just gets taken off the books. Right, the project's done.
The money's encumbered. They take it off. They don't have the bill
Yes,
yet. They
yes.
don't have the bill yet, so they just wipe it and say, we're gonna encumber this for when the bill does come in. So.
So if I might go back to something that Representative Bogert kind of alluded to, I think. So this 649,000 that is coming back through the lapse issue. This money can be used for any line item that has been requested by any department. It's not specific to, we took away 335,000 from one department. This is for general fund to help offset the cost in any area that we feel is the most appropriate that we would recommend. Thank you.
And for instance, because
You got a spreadsheet
I was
here?
going to share this with the full committee on Thursday. I'm sorry, on Tuesday. And I've got so much paperwork here, I don't know what I did with, but
When you're looking for,
Mr. Shat, how many additional requests? What was our additional requests? Our original governor's budget was $143 million. Our additional requests were $102 million for additional requests. So you can tell that if we funded everybody with everything, we'd be quite broke. Yeah. Well, yeah, so we had, yeah, this is the one, yeah, we had a total new requests of $102 million above what is already in our $143 million governor's budget. So that's what we're going to be looking at on Tuesday. Out of that 102,900,000, we've got 600,000 to throw towards that.
And if I may, we have if it's an appropriate ask, do we have a goal in mind of what we're striving towards?
We'll discuss that on Tuesday.
Good answer.
our goal.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Bogart's starting to read my mind. So you mentioned earlier, right, that there's a governor's budget, there's the requested amounts, and then there's the Treasury Secretary's amount. That's what we're going to be talking about eventually. Is that correct? Thank you.
Just a question for anybody. On this sheet here, the additional requests, there was something, public radio, the press, whatever, that when the budget was being worked on, that the governor had put out, I want your needs, but not your wants. Is this needs items or wants? Would you have an opinion?
Many of those would be what the agencies presented at the governor's capital budget hearings last June
Yes,
that didn't get included in this document. So many of the agencies presented to you in the priority number that they had, because
Yes.
some of the things identified in here by the governor weren't at the same priority level as the agency. So I don't know if it's a need or a want, but it was what was presented, and the agencies feel it was appropriate to bring it back to your attention.
Right.
Representative Newton, this is your child's Christmas list.
It's
What
fair
the
to
governor
say,
has is your budget that you can afford for your child's Christmas list.
it's
so-
fair to say that every time the agencies come in with items or a different priority order, some of them were funded in the governor's budget, some not, but they feel every time this happens, they come in with their own list of things they would like to see funded that they feel are important. That happens every time.
So may I? If I go to the compare report. Okay. On there, it says the total appropriation, sections 1 and 2, is 207,782,000. Does that 207 million incorporate the, no. So it's actually, I guess the 207 is a subset of the 143, the 4 million from the highway fund bonds and total other funds and all that is
Yes.
subtracted from it. And then what we're looking at the 143 approximate level is what the governor said should be bonded.
The
If-
143 is the general funds.
And that's what we would bond is the 143.
No, you'd be bonding the other stuff as well, but it's not being paid by the general fund.
That portion.
So the
of it.
highway fund would pay its portion, the other funded agencies would pay its portion.
So we would be looking at trying to attempt to bond 207 million based on just this one sheet.
Right. The thing we.
So it's
managed-
170 million. I think there's some federal funds included on that one sheet.
Yes.
Yeah, so the federal funds aren't bonded.
Okay. So we would subtract out.
Right.
the
Yeah, it's
total,
170
the 30
million.
Yeah, the 38 million would get subtracted out. I'm going to round numbers because we're just talking, generally talking. So we would subtract out of the 207, the 37. And then that's what would be looked at as a state bonding, even though the funds to pay for the bonds would come from separate locations.
That's correct.
And then if we wanted to look at the 207 and add the new additional requests, that would take that up to over 300.
If you included everything, yes. But I believe when the treasurer was here, she talked about
Oh, I'm not talking about
135 to
what the
140.
treasurer talking about. I'm just looking at the ask.
Right.
The
number-
ask
yeah.
is, the
Yep.
total ask is over 309 million.
Well, on the bright side, that's less than $1 billion, which was the ask for the governor when the governor's capital budget hearing back in
Okay.
June.
Well,
Well,
to be
that's
fair,
fair.
we ask the agencies to come in with whatever they might want. And then the press reports, big spenders, they want $1 billion, but that's what we ask them to do and then prioritize from there. As to Representative Bogart's point, the number that we managed to is the general fund bonding vis-à-vis what the treasurer recommended. And then the highway fund bonding, and the other fund bonding, it's in there and it is bonded, but we don't manage to that number. There is in fact the same 10% cap on the highway fund bonding, but it works out all right without actually being looked at.
In layman's term, what, everything you just said in layman's term is, we would look at the treasurer's gold of what number she gave us, no matter how the pay for of that is taken care of.
Well,
Because what we're saying is the other funds and the highway fund's gonna pay a portion of what we totally bond.
yes, but we only consider the treasurer is giving you the general fund bonding target.
Only the general
Right.
fund target. So then, that's why I'm trying to ask these
Right.
questions so we can clarifying. So you would take the general, let's say hypothetically, they said 120 million, okay?
Good number.
Then we could say, on top of that 120 million, we're gonna add 4.6 million and then 22 million on top of the 120 million. So the general fund is expected to pay $120 million bond, and then the others would add to the other. So we would. literally-
Let's go back to your buckets. Let's go back to your buckets. You got.
Well, that
this-
still
this-
goes to
this- this-
143
it doesn't-
million.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. This committee is charged with bucket A. That's the treasurer's side. B, highway funds, we have no say on. Buckets, so the rest of the buckets will all add up to your 200, but our purview is bucket A. Is it gonna be 120 or 143?
Representative Bogart, it might be helpful if you were to look at the House Bill 25
Yep.
and Section 7 on page 5. That your bonds authorized,
What page was that, or?
page 5. It starts on line 8. And if you
Yep,
drop to line 11, exceeding the sum of 170 million. And then you go to line 13, the general fund amount is 143, the highway fund amount is 4.6, and the other funds is 22.
okay,
So the bill, when the body adopts it, would give the treasurer the ability to bond up to $170 million. And the source of funds for that $170 million would be found on lines 13 and 14.
that's what I was trying to get to.
Well, I'm glad I
Thank
could
you.
help you.
Thank you.
And what the rating agencies look at is debt as a percentage of unrestricted revenue. And when they say that, they mean general fund bonded debt as a percentage of general fund unrestricted revenue.
Which
And,
hypothetically. would-
and in fact, and which they'd like to have under 10%. And in fact, they like to have in fact, it's a statutory requirement that the highway fund be under 10% also. But that usually just works out. So we don't actually manage to that number.
Representative Jack, I would recommend that we adjourn
Stop.
this meeting and
Handle any
at
other
that point in
questions in the
time,
full committee.
handle any remaining questions. Just take them offline to Mr. Shea.
Sounds
But
like
in
an
the
excellent,
meantime, there's no reason to keep.
sounds like an excellent plan. Our work here is done.